here after a couple weeks. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to see all of you again. I'm grateful for the spaghetti that was prepared beforehand. We'll find out if you'll be grateful that I ate it, though. So today's sermon is not the first time I've preached it, just as maybe a primer. This is part of a series that I did a couple of years back. So you will be the third group of people to have heard it. But for posterity, I feel like that's good to recognize. On January 20th, 2012, performance artist Marina Abramovic premiered a documentary at the Sundance Film Festival. The film chronicled her 3-month-long, 8 to 10 hour a day performance piece, wherein she sat silently in a chair across from another chair, wherein another person sat. A few years later, she gave a TED Talk about her experiences during the piece, divulging in that how in that space, where people were observed from all sides by people, by video cameras, and by photographic cameras, that the only space that they had to retreat into was themselves. She reflected, there is so much pain and loneliness, so much incredible things when you look into somebody's eyes, that when I stood up from that chair after 3 months, I am not the same person. The title of her exhibit, The Artist is Present. In my 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles in the river Chebar, Ezekiel composes the beginning of his book, a book woven together by autobiographical recollections, poetic expressions of judgment, and apocryphal writings, just by noting where he was sitting and who he was with. When the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. See, 5 years earlier, Ezekiel was a younger man training to be a priest in Jerusalem until the Babylonian soldiers attacked. King Jehoiakim of Jerusalem ended that attack by surrendering. Understand that this is not the siege of Jerusalem, the eventual fall of Jerusalem. That would happen about 7 years later. But in this moment, after the king's surrender, they remove all but the poorest of the city. They empty the treasures and they leave it occupied, standing, but occupied. Which meant the Ark of the Covenant and the temple were intact, and God's presence should have been where the ark was. But that's not where it was that day. No, God's presence was here. It moved to where Ezekiel was. And there he is, sitting at water's edge, perhaps still dreaming of the day he might return to Jerusalem, perhaps wrestling with how to make this place the best home it can be. God comes and in a vision, and it is a grand vision. 4 human-like creatures with 4 wings each, 4 faces each, and like wheels that are like wheels within wheels, something like fire enshrouding it, and someone like fire inside of it. It's grand. Chapter 10, verse 18 reads, "Then the glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the Lord's temple." Chapters 8 through 10 articulates in woeful detail the idolatry that was being committed in the temple daily. See, God was no longer home in their home. He was no longer at home in some of the practice of the Jewish rites of worship. So God relocated, and he found Ezekiel because he was ready for a change, immediate and future. He goes on to say, "O mortal, stand up on your feet, and I will speak with you." Verse 2:1. So Ezekiel stands. Mortal, I am sending you to the people of Israel who have rebelled against me. Eat this scroll and go. Speak to the house of Israel. Chapters 2, 3, 3, 1. I opened my mouth and ate. The content was, as the message is with the prophets, as we've been learning over these last couple months, judgment. Judgment and a future hope. The account of Ezekiel's time with God that day takes us through chapter 3, verse 15. And then, when God is seemingly finished, Ezekiel is carried away with him in the Spirit. Now, the geography isn't particularly clear here. Ezekiel opens with telling us where he is, among the exiles, at the river Chebar. And now he's transported to somewhere among the exiles at the river Chebar. But it's not the distance that I think matters here. Now, I think what we need to note is that Ezekiel, according to his words, opens his book noting that he's just among the exiles. Now, he's sitting with the exiles, and he is stunned. He is distressed. After 7 days, whether those are literal or metaphorical, 7 is one of those biblical numbers of representation, completion in its particular sense. Whether it's actual, whether it's representative, God then comes and names him a watchman with a grave responsibility to deliver God's warning to the people of Israel. That's a snippet of the history up until now. Here's the art. God does give Ezekiel words. He uses a scroll. But more so than any other prophet, I think, Ezekiel is commanded to do things a tad uniquely. He performs a series of street plays commanded by God. I've summarized them. I've given them some names. It's open to interpretation there. But bear with me as we go through this quick overview and the silly voice I'm about to use to do it. The first play found in chapter 3, 24 through 27, which Mandy read. Ezekiel is shut into his own house, with his tongue unable to move and cords binding him. How can he rebuke Israel? Only when God speaks to him. Play 2, the brick siege. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. A city under siege. Ezekiel makes on a brick the image of a city, and against it all kinds of weapons faced toward the city. A plate separates Ezekiel from the city under siege. He presses the plate onto the siege works, sending them toward the city. Told you it's a silly voice. Judas' punishment on the left, that's chapter 4 through 5. Come see a man on his left side, 390 days, each day a year of Israel's punishment. And then followed by barred and sieged on the right, chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. And now come see a man on his opposite side, as Ezekiel performs almost the same act. This time he'll remain on his right side for 40 days, each day a year for the punishment of Judah. His arms barred and face toward the model siege. Watch him prophesy to a brick. We'll follow that with cooking with dung, chapter 4, verses 9 through 12 and 14 through 15. But what shall a man eat during his days of lying on his side? Why, bread, of course, cooked over dung. Human dung, cow dung, cow dung. And then lastly, a hairy division. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. See a man cut off his facial hair, all of it. See a man burn a third of it in the city. See a man take a third around the city, attacking his own cut hair with a sword. See a man scatter a third of it to the wind outside the city. See a man tie up a few strands to his cloak, only to throw it into the fire. Note these are not original titles. Again, please contact the original artist for further info. And thanks for tolerating the silly voice. I didn't know how to just say it. Each of these street plays displayed a portion of God's warning to the people of Israel. The brick siege shows the city of Jerusalem finally being destroyed. A hairy division shows the fullness of God's anger being spent, just as Ezekiel has no more hair, nor will God have any anger left once his judgment is fulfilled. We could spend Sundays upon Sundays unpacking each of these, but today I'm giving you a glance. Barely that. Art is a response to something, a picturesque view, a celebration, heartbreak, all catalysts for great art. Anguish was Ezekiel's catalyst. Remember, he sat in his grief until it was complete. Then he sat longer, and then he performed. And then eventually he spoke, and he spoke in metaphor and analogy. He likened Israel to an adulterous wife, or the useless wood taken from a vine, which is best used for burning. And he did this for a long time, like almost 20 years of prophesying. But that performance art, that marked his earlier career. It marked him as a prophet to the people, and people responded to his art. Chapter 8, verse 1, in the 6th year, in the 6th month, on the 5th day, while I was sitting in my house, and the elders of Judah were sitting with me. Chapter 14, verse 1, some of the elders of Israel came to me and sat down in front of me. Chapter 20, verse 1, in the 7th year, in the 5th month, on the 10th day, some of the elders of Israel came to inquire of the Lord, and they sat down in front of me. And in chapter 24, God informs Ezekiel, that his wife is going to be taken from this world, and that he's not permitted to partake in any of the mourning rituals. People took notice. And they asked him, what does this have to do with us? Ezekiel's actions were bold, and their intent was recognizable. Ezekiel spoke without uttering a word, and the leaders and the elders, they took notice, and they came and they sat with. Art commands a response. Jerusalem's fate was sealed, and it would come to ruin, as would the temple, and it did in 586. All while Ezekiel and many other Hebrews were still in exile. But in the 25th year of their exile, Ezekiel received a vision of hope, a restored temple complete with God's presence, new adornments, and a restored priesthood. Now that temple would sit in a restored Israel. That hope would rekindle something begun with King Josiah to gather as much of the Hebrew as a Jewish culture and begin to embody the spirituality of their culture beyond the limits of Jerusalem's walls. Marina's TED Talk included stills taken from her exhibit. Captured are the faces of those who sat across from her. And you see wide smiles, and you see blank confusion. You see people on the brink of tears, and you see them in tears. You see the human response to her art. And as for us, maybe we aren't here to lie on our side for days on end. I'm confident none of us want to cook our food over dung. Could be wrong. I've been wrong before. And I know I'm good with a simple haircut. I don't need to make a scene of it. Now, art may not be in your bones, or if it is, maybe it's just another kind of art. But I know this, and I'm confident in it, that we must speak the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. That our actions often speak louder than our words. I know that healing, care, and love begin with presence. And I also know this, we're never short of an audience. Just take a look who is sitting with you. Oh, and the name of that city in which the new temple and Ezekiel's vision would reside, the Lord is there. Thank you again for putting up with a silly voice. I admit when I did the sermon, there weren't questions. It wasn't part of that particular form. So in a way, I think we've somewhat tackled it, but if it's worth it, at your tables, talk about what it is to be present. Maybe when you felt being present with. That might tie its way back into community. And if you feel like you've already answered it, then just talk. Be present. Sit in silence if you need to. Just be. Thank you.